The first thing Rosalie Finch felt was pain. Not fear, not confusion, just pain. White hot and endless. Her breath came in short gasps. Dirt filled her mouth, and blood soaked the torn hem of her dress. Somewhere behind her, the faint echo of gunfire rolled across the valley like thunder. She tried to move, but her legs screamed back in agony. The wagon trail was gone. The sky spun above her, a hard blue without mercy. She remembered the faces of her students to be. The chalkboard waiting in that little frontier schoolhouse near South Pass City. Then her vision blurred again. A thin cry escaped her lips. The sound was small, swallowed by the pine-covered slopes of the Wind River Range. Her bonnet lay beside her, crushed and spattered with mud. Ants crawled across the fabric. She didn't even have the strength to brush them away. Night had fallen when she last remembered running. 2 men had stepped out from the brush, their eyes wild from hunger and whiskey. The driver of the supply wagon shouted once, then everything exploded in noise. Rosalie had jumped, stumbled down the rocky bank, and vanished into the trees. Since then, the world had become a fevered blur of shadows and pain. Now the morning sun pressed down hard. Sweat and blood made her skin shine in the heat. She touched her thigh and felt the wound throb under her fingers, swollen and hot. Her stomach turned when she saw how deep the cut ran. The edges were purple and slick with dirt. She whispered, half to herself, half to the sky. Please, someone. A horse snorted nearby. She froze, her heart hammering. A figure moved between the trees, broad shoulders. A weathered hat, a rifle slung behind the saddle. For a moment she thought the bandits had found her again. Her trembling hand reached for a rock, but she was too weak to lift it. The man crouched beside her. His voice was low, steady, almost gentle. Easy now. You're hurt bad. He smelled of sweat, leather, and the faint sharpness of whiskey. She saw the blue of his eyes, calm but alert. Her lips quivered. My leg, it's swelling fast. He looked down and his jaw tightened. In the bright light, the wound was angry red and rising under the skin. He reached for a canteen, poured water over his hands, and studied her face. If we don't fix this soon, you won't make it past tomorrow. Her pulse quickened. The sound of his words blended with the rustle of the pines and the buzz of flies circling her wound. Somewhere far below, the Sweetwater River glittered in the sun, indifferent and cold. Rosalie tried to speak, but only one thought echoed in her mind. Who was this stranger? And why did his calm voice make her believe that she might live? The sun sat high now, burning through the thin air above the slopes. Rosalie blinked against the light. Her lips were cracked, her face pale. The man, Eli, poured a trickle of water on a cloth and pressed it gently to her forehead. Try to stay awake, he said, his voice rough but kind. You're safe for now. She nodded faintly. Who are you? Just a man who's seen too many bad mornings, he said, glancing toward the trail. His horse pawed at the ground nearby, restless. Name's Eli McCrae. He checked her wound again. Squinting in the sunlight, the skin around the gash was swollen tight, hot to the touch. He frowned. You weren't wrong. It's swelling fast. Rosalie bit her lip. The pain shot up her leg and into her chest. Am I going to lose it? Not if I can help it, Eli said. He took a bottle from his saddlebag. The sharp smell of whiskey filled the air. This will burn like hell, but it'll keep you alive. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a gasp. You sure you know what you're doing? Eli gave a small smile, the kind that came from old memories. Used to patch up worse than this back in the war. He cleaned the wound, poured whiskey straight onto it. Rosalie cried out, clutching at the dirt. He held her steady with one hand, murmuring low, Breathe, teacher, breathe. He tore a strip from a red scarf, one that looked like it had seen many miles, and wrapped it firm around her thigh. Then he crushed a handful of dry herbs between his palms, mixing them with a bit of water from the canteen. Old trick from an army medic, yarrow and comfrey. They draw the heat out. Her eyes fluttered open. Why help me? She whispered. You don't even know me. Eli looked at her for a moment, then away toward the trees. Out here, nobody lasts alone. That's reason enough. He lifted her carefully, resting her back against his coat for a moment. The silence between them felt heavier than the mountains around. The breeze carried the scent of sage and dust, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried. Rosalie's breathing steadied. Her hands stopped trembling, but the pain still pulsed under the bandage, slow and deep. Eli crouched by the Sweetwater and refilled the canteen, then glanced toward the ridge. His expression shifted. There were tracks in the dirt, boot prints, fresh ones. He cursed softly under his breath. Rosalie followed his eyes, her heart starting to race again. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his rifle and checked the chamber. His voice dropped, low and calm. "Looks like we've got company." Then he looked back at her, the corner of his mouth tightening. "Stay still, teacher. No matter what you hear." The sound of boots scraping on dry dirt broke the silence. Eli froze. His hand rested easy on the rifle, but his eyes sharpened like glass. He leaned close to Rosalie. "Stay quiet. Don't move." Not a sound. Rosalie clutched the red scarf wound around her thigh. Every breath was a struggle, but she nodded. The heat pressed down heavy. Flies buzzed. The whole valley felt like it was holding its breath. Then a voice came from the trees, rough, slurred. "Hey there, stranger. Mind sharing what's in that pack of yours?" Eli stood slowly, brushing dust off his shirt. Two men stepped out, guns hanging low, eyes darting. They looked like they hadn't slept in days. Their clothes were torn, faces burned by the sun, the same faces Rosalie had seen before. "The ones from the trail." Eli's tone stayed calm. "Ain't much worth taking. Just a wounded woman and some herbs. You best keep riding." One of the men sneered. "Wounded woman, huh? That's so. Maybe we'll check for ourselves." Eli's thumb rested on the hammer of his rifle. "You take one more step and you'll be limping home. I ain't warning twice." They laughed, but it wasn't brave laughter. It was the kind men make when they don't know what else to do. Dust swirled between them, shimmering in the sun. The taller one shifted his weight. "We just want supplies. Times are hard. Don't make this worse." Eli's eyes didn't waver. "Then turn around before you find out how bad hard can get." For a moment, no one moved. The wind sighed through the sagebrush. Then, like something snapping, both men reached for their guns. The crack of Eli's rifle rolled through the valley. A bullet bit the dirt an inch from their boots. They stumbled back, eyes wide. "That was your warning," Eli said. "The next one won't miss." Something in his voice carried weight. The kind of weight you hear from a man who's already buried enough ghosts. The two bandits backed away slow, muttering curses, and disappeared into the trees. Eli waited until the sound of their horses faded. Then he knelt beside Rosalie again. Her eyes were wide with fear and disbelief. "You didn't kill them," she whispered. He shook his head. "Didn't need to. Out here, sometimes mercy hits harder than lead." She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "You're a strange man, Eli McCrae." "Maybe," he said softly. "But you're still breathing, teacher. That's what matters." The wind carried the smell of sage and gunpowder. The sun dipped lower, painting the rocks gold. Rosalie leaned her head back and closed her eyes. For the first time since the ambush, she felt the faint pull of safety. Eli looked toward the west, still gripping his rifle, knowing deep down this wasn't over. Somewhere in those trees, trouble was still waiting, but Eli knew men like them didn't scare easy. Hunger and whiskey could twist a man's mind worse than fear ever could. And out here, desperate men always come back, but Eli knew men like them didn't scare easy. Hunger and whiskey could twist a man's mind worse than fear ever could. And out here, desperate men always come back. If you're still with me, pour yourself a warm cup of tea, sit back, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're listening from. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this wild western tale. By late afternoon, the air felt heavy as wet wool. The clouds gathered over the ridges to low and dark. Eli sat beside Rosalie, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. Her skin burned with fever, her lips pale and trembling. The swelling had crept higher up her thigh, tight and angry. He knew what that meant. "Infection," he muttered under his breath. "If I don't cut it soon, she's done for." Rosalie opened her eyes weakly. What are you saying? Stay still, he said, voice steady. I've got to drain it. It's the only way. Her fingers clenched around his arm. Will it hurt? Eli met her eyes. Yes, but pain's better than dying. He took a long breath, poured whiskey over his knife, then held it close to the fire until the blade glowed dull red. The smell of metal and smoke filled the air. Rosalie turned her face away, whispering a prayer. Hold on, teacher, Eli said quietly. You're stronger than you think. The knife touched skin. She cried out, the sound echoing through the canyon. Eli's hand was steady, his jaw locked tight. A trickle of thick, yellow fluid spilled out, mixing with blood. He cleaned it fast, pressed the herbs, and wrapped it tight with fresh cloth. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, glassy and distant, then slipped halfway closed again. She wasn't awake, not really, just drifting somewhere between fever and pain. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, glassy and distant, then slipped halfway closed again. She wasn't awake, not really, just drifting somewhere between fever and pain. Then he sat back, chest heaving, eyes fixed on her face. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, her breathing slowed. The fever began to ease. She was still alive. Eli leaned against the rock wall, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked up just as a sound caught his ear, the snap of a twig, the shuffle of boots. He cursed under his breath. Those same two men hadn't gone far. They'd circled back. Eli moved fast. He grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber, and slipped behind a boulder. They crept closer, whispering about finishing the job and taking the horse. One muttered, no food left at camp. That horse is our only way out. Eli waited until one stepped into the open, then he kicked a loose rock, sending it tumbling. The man spun toward the noise. That was the moment Eli needed. Two sharp shots cracked the air. One hit the dirt beside their feet. The other split a branch above their heads. They stumbled, slipped in the wet sand by the river's edge, and fell hard. The wet alkali sand gripped their boots like glue, and the river hissed against the stones as if it had seen this 100 times before. Eli was on them before they could rise. He struck one with the butt of his rifle, grabbed the other by the collar, and slammed him down. The fight was over in seconds. He tied their wrists with rope, breathing hard. You're done now, he said, voice flat. There's a deputy in Lander who'll know what to do with you. The men muttered curses, but Eli didn't listen. He turned back toward Rosalie, still lying where he'd left her. The setting sun caught her face, soft and peaceful at last. He knelt beside her, whispering, You're safe now. But as he looked toward the horizon, the wind shifted again, bringing with it a new sound, distant hoofbeats, slow, heavy, coming closer. Eli's hand tightened on his rifle. Was it help at last, or another kind of trouble? The next morning came quiet and bright. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the land washed clean. The hoofbeats Eli had heard turned out to be a patrol from Lander, led by Deputy Howe. They took the two outlaws away without much talk. Howe said they had been riding the ridge since dusk, following fresh tracks in the echo of two rifle shots that rolled down the valley. Justice had a way of moving slow out here, but it still moved. Eli stayed behind to tend to Rosalie. Her fever broke with the sunrise. When she opened her eyes, he was sitting by the fire, his hat tipped low, the red scarf now folded neatly beside her bedroll. She smiled weakly. You didn't leave. He lifted his eyes, the corners creasing with a tired grin. Didn't have anywhere better to be. For days he cared for her, feeding her broth, changing the bandage, talking just enough to keep her awake. She learned he once had a wife and a son, both lost to fever years ago. Since then he had lived alone, fixing fences, patching wounds when he found travelers in trouble. She listened, and something in her heart shifted. Pain recognized pain. Weeks later, when she was strong enough to stand, he rode with her to South Pass City. The schoolhouse stood crooked on a hill of wild grass, the paint peeling. The bell rusted but still there. Eli helped her off the horse, his hands rough but gentle. This where you start over, he said. Rosalie looked at the empty windows, then at him. We both start over, I think. He stayed to build her a porch, a small fence, even carved her a little box for chalk and books, every day. Before the children arrived, she would see him sitting near the gate, sipping coffee, pretending to fix something that didn't need fixing, and every day, he left before the bell rang. No promises, no big words, just presence. The townsfolk began to whisper that the war man and the school teacher were keeping each other alive. Maybe they were right. By autumn, the hills turned gold again. Rosalie's limp faded. Eli still stopped by with supplies, sometimes with a story, sometimes just to sit. One evening, she handed him a cup of tea and said, "You know, I never did thank you properly." He smiled. "You're alive. That's thanks enough." They sat in silence, watching the sun melt behind the mountains, and for once, neither of them felt alone. Out here in the West, people learned that kindness could save as surely as a gun. That justice was not always loud, and love did not always need to speak. So maybe that's the real question. Between law and mercy. Between survival and love. Which one would you choose when no one is watching? If this story moved you, give it a like. Share it with someone who still believes in quiet heroes, and subscribe for more tales from the wild heart of the American West. Now, pour yourself a cup of tea, lean back, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're listening from and what this story made you feel today.